Hello! So today I decided that I would tackle how to land on the Mun. Now being the closest body to Kerbin, the Mun is going to be your obvious destination to go first. Now when you're building the rocket, you want to start with just a basic capsule. I picked the lander can just because it's really small and easy to use. And then you're going to want to add to the capsule. Now I like to start with just the basic things a capsule might need, such as a parachute on the way back. I'm picking some drogue parachutes just to make it a lot easier on landing. You don't necessarily need them. Then the main parachute, you do need one of those. Some batteries, just some very basic equipment. Solar panels, I like to put them on both sides, mostly because it looks cool. A heat shield, you need that. And then a decoupler. I always forget decouplers, but. And then for the actual fuel for the upper stage, I'm going to do an asparagus staging, which is the main fuel tank's fuel is being drawn from the boosters, and then once the boosters' fuel is dried up, they detach, and then you're left with a fully fueled main stage, which is nice. Yeah, just takes a little bit. Now how to do this is you just mirror the parts. Even though you're having 4 boosters, you mirror it twice. That way you can have 2 separate detaches, which comes in handy when you're doing the fuel lines. That's the only thing different between the two. Just kind of takes some time to build a good craft. Then so for the fuel lines, you just want to go from one booster to the next, and then from that booster to the main stage. Pretty simple. And then just making sure that all of the action groups are right. So you want the farthest stage to go first, so the stage that isn't connected to the main capsule, and then the stage that is. And you want your drogue chutes to deploy before your main chutes. And then I like to add some lights just so I can see when I'm landing places. And then again a decoupler. And then I'm going to put this all under one fairing. Now, I'm using the small fairing mostly just so I can make the rocket look sort of like a Saturn V. It's just more my personal preference. You can feel free to use this design or use anything you want. I'm not going to stop you. And then so this stage is just going to basically get me from Kerbin to the Mun and start my deceleration. Now you want another reaction wheel there because basically the stage, you need to control yourself in orbit, and that's how you do it. I like the Poodle engine because it's pretty fuel efficient and it's just a good engine for orbit. Then starting the main stages, the bigger stage. You gotta get to those big parts. For the second stage, it's just going to be a pretty big fuel tank in the grand scheme of things, but small for the engine. And then a decoupler again. And for the main stage, I'm using 2 big fuel tanks just because that's what I found works the best. You can experiment with that all you want. Just kind of doing the final touches on my craft, making sure all the staging is correct, that you want the decouplers with the rockets. And then I'm doing action groups on this just for my solar panels. You don't have to, I just find that it really helps me to just press a button and then your solar panels in orbit. Gotta make sure Jeb's the pilot. Always pick Jeb. And I forgot landing legs. So that's important. If you're gonna land on somewhere, you need landing legs. Just making sure that they actually go beneath the engine so that the engine's not the lowest part. Looks like we're good. You want to make sure that they start retracted because you're not going to be landing for a little bit. And then I like to use the launch assist just because it keeps the rocket a little bit more stable on the launch pad. And I'm using these big fins just to make it a little bit more controllable and or in launch, but you don't have to. I'm going to be having this design has a lot of extra fuel at the end, so you know, if you mess up or anything like that, this is definitely the craft for you. It's very easy to pilot, and it's kind of hard. I don't want to say hard to mess up, but it's definitely harder than some of the other crafts I've made. And you always want to make sure that the launch clamps go off with the engines. That way you're not wasting fuel, or even worse, you're just falling. Lost a lot of crafts that way. So just gonna launch. 3. I love the launch sequence. Now, this is gonna take a little bit of time. Don't worry about doing a gravity turn or anything like that. That's really good to do and everything like that, but in this craft there's enough fuel where it flies itself to orbit, and then you just have to do a turn maneuver once you get there. I'll explain that later in the video. But for now, just sit back and definitely turn on that stability assist and just wait until the first engine kicks out. Launch takes a little bit in this vehicle, but that's alright. Just need some patience. I'm just going to kind of speed this up for you post-production. I'm just kind of looking at some stuff. It's getting a nice. I'm not doing anything to change the change where I'm going. I'm just going straight. I haven't moved at all. And then that engine kicks out, and a couple. And then don't fire the next stage yet. Wait until you're at, or just about at the apoapse, which is your highest point. And then you're going to burn there. Now you got to be careful time warping there because I've missed it more times than I can count, and that's an issue because then you come back to Kerbal. So just about there, and you want to be just a little bit before, mostly to just get that you can do the burn before, but it's harder to do it after. That's why. And the burn takes some time, which you got to account for. Gotta turn on the lights too. Then you just want to press the prograde button on your stability assist and fire the engine full blast. And you're going to wait until you have a pretty circular orbit, which is when your apoapse, which is the highest point, and your periapse, which is the lowest point, are about the same. Now, right now, as you notice, I don't have a periapse, and that's because I'm going to fall back to Earth if I don't do anything right now. But that's why I'm burning to try and get a circular orbit in. Now I'm just going to detach the second stage, and then I'm going to set the MUN as a target. Now to get to the MUN, what you're going to want to do is once you get to your periapse, you're going to start your burn. And this is going to take some time, so again, just be patient. And then you're going to keep burning until you start getting crosshairs with the MUN. Now what the crosshairs are just closest encounter points, and that just means that in some time you will get an encounter. So you just gotta wait some time. You could get an encounter right away. You might get lucky. Then once you get in orbit around the Mun, you're just gonna wait until you hit your periaps, which again is your lowest point. And then you're just going to want to fire retrograde until you get a nice circular orbit, just like we did in Kerbin. I like to aim for an orbit around 20 to 70 kilometers above the Mun, but it's more up to you. Higher orbit means that it's going to be a little bit harder to land because you're going to be coming in faster, but whatever works. Then finally you're going to pick a spot to land on the Mun. Now you're going to want to look for a spot that doesn't have any craters, and I like to land on the light side. Now anywhere from 20 kilometers to 10 kilometers above the Mun, you're going to want to start decelerating. Now what that means is you're just going to fire retrograde until you hit about a speed of 200 meters per second. Then you're just going to coast for a little bit longer. Then once you get a little bit closer to the Mun, you'll start to notice that you can see the textures, sort of those little squares in the Mun surface. And once you can start to see those, that's usually a cue for me that I need to start slowing down quite a bit. And then you'll notice as you slow down, you start to get a more vertical position. And that's what you want because remember, this spacecraft is supposed to land vertically. One thing that is very important is once you start to get completely vertical like I am here, you're going to want to switch the stability assist to just stable instead of retrograde. And the reason for that is when you land, your retrograde and your protograde, they usually switch, and that can cause a problem when the stability assist is on. Even if you're lucky enough to have a scenario like mine where you still have fuel left in your third stage, you're going to want to go ahead and detach that before you land on the Mun because there's no landing legs on that. So I try and slow down as much as possible with that stage, and then once I'm pretty close to the ground, detach it. And then you're on the final descent. Now you're going to want to land really softly at anywhere under 5 meters per second. And right now I'm just kind of toggling the engine on and off to try and get that very soft touchdown that you want. Now some very common things to go wrong when you're landing on the Mun is, just like I did, it tips over, and to do that you just kind of got to rock it back up. You got to remember that the Mun has a lot less gravity than Kerbin, and so all you need to do is put up your landing gear and then just kind of use that those reaction wheels to point yourself back up. And then once you're up, deploy the landing legs again, and then you're fine. Then you gotta make some epic steps onto the Mun surface. Jebediah Kerman, first Kerman to fall on the Mun. And then you always gotta remember to plant a flag. If you don't plant a flag, there's no proof you were there. Just remember that. And now you got to bring your Kerbals back home. So you're just going to want to get back into your capsule. Then again, you're going to want to use those reaction control wheels to make that horizon bar just above the 90-degree mark. And sometimes it's hard to find, but it doesn't have to be exactly 90, and if it's not 90, it's not that big of a deal, but it makes for a very nice orbit. And then you're just going to want to throttle up and get out off in the mud. And then I'm picking a 30-degree heading just because it's high enough where I won't clip any of the mountains, but it's low enough where I can still save some fuel. And I'm just checking my fuel levels, seeing everything's good. And so the next thing that you're really going to be focusing on doing is dropping the fuel, the first booster stage. And you're going to drop that once the booster stage is completely out of fuel. Alright, so you're going to stop burning when you have an apoapse of about 50 kilometers, somewhere around there. It can be a little bit more or less. And then you're going to want to stop that and then warp to your apoapse and then circularize your orbit once again. Just going to throttle up to try and get out of the Mun's sphere of influence and into Kerbin's. And then since the first booster stage is completely depleted of fuel, I'm just going to detach it, and then it's completely fueled again. That's why I just love asparagus staging. It is so nice to have. Now this next step is optional. I did it because I had a lot of extra fuel, but if you're running low on fuel, this is definitely a step that you can skip. What I'm doing is I'm just lowering my Kerbin orbit just to make it a little bit easier for the descent phase, but with this capsule, it can survive a very steep descent. Then finally, to bring them home, you're just going to want to point retrograde and then burn all the way until your periapse disappears. Now the goal is to have as a low angle of attack as possible. You can have a high angle of attack again with this craft, but that should be something that you try and avoid. And then when you come in, you're going to want to ditch all the fuel tanks, so you can either burn it all off retrograde, or you can just detach it. Even though there's fuel, which seems kind of like a waste, but you're going to want to make sure your solar panels are retracted. I've clipped many solar panels in my day. And then you're just going to want to put the stability assist on retrograde and ride out re-entry. Now stuff's going to start to get red, and that's normal. You have a heat shield for this reason. So you just kind of got to wait until about 10,000 meters. That's really the next point where you'd even do anything at all. So now once the parachute turns that gray color instead of red, you're going to want to press spacebar to deploy them. And then shortly after that, your main parachute should also be gray. And then you're going to want to deploy that as well. And this will completely stop you. I just kind of like looking out the capsule window, looking at the ocean as it's coming down, or as I'm going towards it, I guess. And then that's it. You have successfully gone to the Mun and gotten back. And hopefully you didn't kill anyone, but, Kerbal's lives are very expendable. And so, thanks for watching the video, and if you like this, be sure to subscribe, and I plan on making a lot more KSP videos in the future. Thanks.